Hi guys, it's Jess from Honest Fiction, and welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I am going to be sharing my June wrap-up. Alright guys, so June was another amazing reading month. I will say, I read some thick books in June. I was just going through all the books I read, and a decent amount of them were over 500 pages, so I'm low-key pretty proud of myself. But there is a mix of fantasy romance, dark romance, some emotional romances, and then a couple monster romances. Now, if you're unfamiliar with my channel, I post new videos every Wednesday and Sunday. If you haven't yet, please like and subscribe. You can also hit the notification bell to be notified whenever I post new bookish content. You can also check out my Instagram and Goodreads, both linked down below. With all that out of the way, let's talk about all the books I read in June. So unlike my other wrap-ups, I'm actually going to start off with a book that I DNF'd. So I don't know what possessed me, but for some reason I posted on Instagram that I DNF'd this book, but then I got a bunch of messages saying, oh my gosh, this book must be terrible, you never DNF books, what was wrong with the book? And that's not necessarily the case. I do DNF books, I just don't normally post it on Instagram, and I think I'm going to start doing that more because I want to start normalizing DNF'ing. It's something I've been working on because I found myself forcing myself to read books that I just was not enjoying just so I could say I finished it, and I feel like I really need to start DNF'ing more. So the book I DNF'd was Blood Mercy by Vela Roth. So this is a fantasy romance, or a vampire fantasy romance, and I'm gonna be honest, I only got about a third of the way into it. However, this was a soft DNF. I will try to go back and read this series because I do know people that have read it, that have loved it. I've looked up Goodreads reviews, and it seems like a book I would really enjoy. My issue with the book was the writing. So the writing is very lyrical. It's very, very full of details. This author just loves details. And I wanted a book that was just filled with action, filled with spice, and just like was a more fast-paced plot. And that wasn't this book, unfortunately. So I'm gonna try to pick this up again, probably in the winter, because that's when I prefer more like dense fantasy books. But overall, I did DNF this, and this was the only DNF of June. Starting off with fantasy romance, first up we have The Book of Azreal, and this is by Nicole. So this is following Diana, and at the start of our story, Diana's sister is mortally wounded. So Diana is just praying to anybody to come and save her sister, and this monster named Caden essentially shows up and says, hey, I'll save your sister, but I'm going to transform you into essentially a vampiric monster, and you have to do my bidding for the rest of your eternal life. And she's like, bet, let's do it. So her sister is saved, and then Caden pretty much takes control of Diana. So Diana is now this badass assassin vampiric monster, and she's doing Caden's bidding. And Caden says, hey, I need you to get the Book of Azreal, and it's gonna allow us to essentially take control of the entire world, and then monsters will rule, and it'll just be glorious, yay. So Diana is attempting to do this, and while doing this, she accidentally kills another mythical being. Well, this triggers almost like an alarm, and then Liam hears it. Liam is a god, and he's like, oh my god, one of my friends was killed, what is going on? He travels to the planet that all of these people, or the realm all of these people inhabit, and is like, you killed my friend, and Diana's like, I need to find this book. And they end up working together, and Liam is essentially working to try to destroy this book while Diana is trying to get the book and give it back to Caden. So I don't know how I feel. I originally gave this 5 stars. The ending is insane. It has an amazing cliffhanger ending that you're gonna pick up the next book immediately or want to. However, the pacing in this, it is very slow while it also has a lot of action in the beginning. There's just times where I felt there were some unnecessary plot points and it dragged a little bit. It just wasn't a very quick read. However, I love the characters, I love the romance. So this is very much like if Manon from the Throne of Glass series had to partner up with like a brooding Zeus character, and they had to work together. So I loved the female main character in this, Diana. She's just such a badass, and she's supposed to be like the villain, but you fall in love with her so quickly, and it's just an overall really good story. So I highly recommend if you're a fan of fantasy romance, especially if you love Manon from Throne of Glass, you're gonna love this. I'm just very curious how I'm gonna feel about book 2. And next up, we have Order of the Scorpions by Ivy Asher. This is a dark, why choose fantasy romance, and it is perfection. It was my favorite book of June. Highly, highly recommend. So the story is following Osset, and the beginning of the story, Osset wakes up in this disgusting cell, and she has no memory of her life. She doesn't know her name, she doesn't know anything about herself. She just knows that she is naked and in this cell that is being controlled by these orcs. So these orcs end up taking Aset to a fae who tells her name, and that is it. And then eventually she is essentially sold into these like gladiator type slave camps. So she becomes a blade slave, which means she's taught how to become an assassin, and she's just amazing at killing. So she eventually is hoping to be sold to one of the different assassin guilds, and she ends up being sold to the Scorpion Guild. And the story goes from there. Obviously, like I said, it is wide choose, so you know her and the Scorpions are gonna have a good time. I will say, this was not nearly as spicy as I was expecting, and I don't mean that as a negative. The spice was great once we got it, but it is very, very slow burn. They really develop a relationship between Aset and the Scorpions. Also, there's an entire history that we have to uncover throughout this book. We also don't know who Aset is, so we're trying to pick up these little clues as the story goes to try to figure out, who is she? Is she a fae? Is she actually one of the assassins? And all of this other stuff, and it's just so much fun. I loved this book. 5 stars easily, so please, if you pick up any book in this video, definitely check out Order of the Scorpions. And next up, I read Lord of Golden Glory by Lisette Marshall. This is the sequel to A Court of Blood and Bindings. I loved this. I somehow loved this more than the first book, and I didn't think that was possible. So I can't really say much about this book without giving away spoilers, but this essentially picks up right where A Court of Blood and Bindings left off. And in this book, we find out a lot more about Creon and his powers and how he's able to sense other people's emotions, how it affects him, also what caused him to do the things he did in the first war. We're given a little bit more details on that. And our main character also really comes into her power, starts embracing it, starts learning how to fight, and it's just such an amazing sequel. We're also introduced to new characters that I know are going to play a huge role in the third book. So I just cannot wait to continue with this series. I absolutely love it. So if you're a fan of like ACOTAR and Throne of Glass, I think you will definitely enjoy the Court of Blood and Binding series. And this next book came as such a surprise, and that is A Kingdom of Blood and Betrayal by Halle Renee. So this is the sequel to A Kingdom of Stars and Shadows. Now, A Kingdom of Stars and Shadows, I had a lot of trouble rating. I think I settled on like 2.53. There were parts of the story that I really liked. I loved the overall plot. I love the characters. I just thought that it wasn't fleshed out enough, and the last third of the book just ended up being smut. This book, similar. I mean, there's still a lot of spicy time, a little bit more than necessary for such a short book. However, I rated this 4 stars. I really enjoyed it. I like what we got with the characters. The ending of this book was absolutely insane. I cannot wait for the third book to come out via audio. I really enjoyed this. So I will say, if you weren't sure about the first book, definitely try giving the second book a shot. Like I said, I can't really get into this without giving away spoilers, but we're essentially following our characters where they left off. Some big secrets are revealed. I know that's very vague, but overall, I really liked this one. So hopefully the third book is even better. We will see. So continuing with the From Blood and Ash read-along, I read A War of Two Queens by Jennifer L. Armentrout. So this is the 4th book in the From Blood and Ash series. The 5th book, A Soul of Ash and Blood, is going to be releasing later in July, and that is from Castile's perspective, looking back on the events of books 1 through 4. Now, if you caught our live show for this book, you will know that I do love the series. It's one of my favorites. The magic system in this series is very confusing, and I am someone that reads a lot of fantasy romance, and I'm having a lot of trouble. So I reread a lot of the books in this series, and I'm still having issues deciphering between deities and gods and how those relationships interconnect and how it's going to affect the next book and how the prequel series relates to this series and things like that. Overall, I'm still enjoying it, and you can figure it out. It's just, I feel like it could have been mapped out a little bit easier. And then the other thing is that if you're listening to this via audio, you might have some issues as far as the names. So we have Nyktos and we have Nectus, we have Malek, we have Malik. All of the names are unbelievably similar, and that is my biggest issue with this series as a whole. However, I love the romance, I love Castile and Poppy, I love Kieran, I love everything about this series, so I will read every single book Jennifer L. Armentrout puts out for this series. It's just, there are definitely some issues, and I get it. But overall, if you haven't read this yet and you've read the first 3 books, definitely recommend picking it up. The ending of this, like a lot of the other books I mentioned, is absolutely insane, and I can't wait to read the 5th book when it comes out. And next up is Anchor of Secrets. So this was kindly sent to me from the author. So this is the discreet cover, and then this is the regular cover, and they are both absolutely stunning. So Anchor of Secrets is the sequel to Legacy of Shadows. It is a paranormal, why choose, fantasy romance, and I'm absolutely obsessed. So this story pretty much picks up exactly where Legacy of Shadows ended. We're following Leighton as she is in a very precarious situation and has to get out of it. But this book has a lot more action, and I feel like the characters are a lot more fleshed out. We get more spice, definitely more spice. That first book felt very much like a setup book where we're introduced to characters and we kind of find out about the world and the magic. And this book felt like we just get the action and we get all the fun times. So I really, really enjoyed this, and I cannot wait to read the third book. I will say, if you're a fan of the Bonsa Tai and the Zodiac Academy series, this series has a very similar vibe, so I would definitely give it a shot. And moving into monster romance, I love that I have like a monster romance section because I was having so much trouble finding monster romances that I enjoyed, and now I'm almost getting like a 5-star read a month that's a monster romance, and that's very exciting. So anyway, the first book I read that was a monster romance was Captive by the Horde King, and this is by Zoey Draven. So my friend Hannah Blackwell messaged me on Instagram and was like, you need to read this book, it's absolutely amazing, and I did, I really enjoyed it. So we are following Luna, who is this human girl, but she lives on an alien planet, and this planet is essentially ruled by the Dakari, and they are like this barbarian kind of people. And they pretty much set the rules for all of the humans. Well, Luna's brother ends up breaking one of these rules. I'm pretty sure he either hunts or like starts a fire. And the Dakari horde comes and they want to kill Luna's brother. However, she promised her mother when her mother was dying that she would take care of her brother. So Luna ends up sacrificing herself to the Horde King and says, hey, take me instead as your war prize and leave my brother alone. So the Horde King agrees, takes Luna as his war prize, and it's pretty much their relationship. So I wouldn't even say enemies to lovers, because it's almost like Luna just doesn't know anything about these people. I just kind of assumed they were enemies. It's a very interesting dynamic. And honestly, I was kind of annoyed with the FMC for a lot of the beginning of the novel, just because she is just very, very naive and doesn't even like think to try to accept life with these people. But eventually she kind of figures things out and embraces her role as one of the people in this new Dakari horde. And it was a really cute relationship, and I really enjoyed it. So I will definitely be reading more by this author. I've, since finishing that book, looked into this author, and she has a lot of monster romances, and the covers are all absolutely stunning. So I cannot wait to read more. And next up, I read Treasure in the Abyss by Tiffany Roberts. Unfortunately, this monster romance didn't really work for me, and I'm not even sure why. I just didn't really feel connected with the characters. So we're following this girl that also lives on an alien planet, and she's terrified of water because one of her, I think it's her sister or her best friend, drowned. So her boyfriend does not care that she's scared of water, makes her go on a boat anyway, and that boat ends up capsizing. So our main character ends up being saved by a merman, and he takes her to this cave and is essentially like, hey, I gotta keep you as a prisoner because if you leave, you're gonna tell all the humans about me, and I don't want that. So the entire book is kind of them slowly getting a relationship, but it almost kind of had a Stockholm type feel because really she didn't have any other choice. She's stuck in this cave. So it's either love the merman or just kind of die in this cave. And I don't know, I could not get into it. So I did finish it. I have no interest in reading the rest of that series. However, I will definitely be picking up other books by Tiffany Roberts. That is the same author that wrote Ensnared, the giant spider alien romance that I'm completely obsessed with. So I will definitely be reading more from this author. Unfortunately, this series was just not for me. Moving into Mafia romance, I've already talked about this series in a few other videos, so I'll keep this pretty brief. But we have the Perfectly Imperfect series. So I read the first 2 books. The first one is Painted Scars. And apparently this is soft Mafia romance, and I didn't know that was a thing. But I guess that does make sense because these are very cute stories, despite the fact that they're still taking place with the Bratva and the Mafia characters. So there's still a lot of killing. There's still a lot of like horrible things that happen. But the romances are very, very cute. So this one, we are following the head of the Bratva. He has been in a car accident. He's no longer able to use his legs. He's in a wheelchair. And his inner circle essentially tells him that he needs to get a wife, or at least a pretend wife. So that makes it seem like he's about to have an heir. and it'll just help like strengthen his position. So he ends up finding out that this man has been embezzling money from him, and this man has a very attractive daughter that is amazing at acting. So they end up working together. She decides to do a fake marriage with the head of the Bratha in order to save her father's life, essentially, and the story goes from there. We also find out that some pretty terrible things happened to our female MC, so she has a little bit of PTSD when it comes to being around tall males, and I loved this book so much. I loved their relationship. I loved the action. Everything about this book was perfection. Which is why I immediately picked up Broken Whispers, which is the second book in the Perfectly Imperfect series. So this is following the general from the Bratha that we meet in the first book. He has to marry someone from the Italian Mafia to stop a war from breaking out. So he ends up being arranged to marry Bianca, who is the eldest daughter of the head of the Italian Mafia. Now, she is a ballerina, and she also isn't able to use her voice because of a car accident. So they end up being forced to be married, and I loved this story. So the general, the male main character, he is horribly scarred. He is missing an eye, he wears an eye patch, and he just is a very like scary, brooding character, but he's also a single dad, and it is so cute to see him just completely dote on his little daughter and spoil her, but also be like so threatening to like all of the other people in the Bratva and the other different mafias. And also how he is with Bianca. I love him and Bianca's relationship because they slowly have to understand each other. And they're both very just nervous about how the other person is perceiving them. And it's also, both of these books are very much about them healing and helping each other heal on top of a romance, and I just absolutely love it. So I'm pretty sure the third book is gonna come out via audio in July. I'm so excited, and I just can't wait to read the rest of this series. And moving into contemporary romance, this first duet was actually recommended to me by Cheyenne from That Tall Book Girl, and I ended up absolutely loving it, and that is the Naked Fisherman duet. So this first book is a forbidden age gap romance. We're following Reese, and she is being raised by her grandparents while her mother is incarcerated. Now, her grandparents are very strict. They are very conservative, very religious. So Reese is very naive, and when her mom eventually gets out of jail and Reese decides she's gonna move back in with her, she realizes she doesn't know very much about the outside world at all. So because of some like work engagements, Reese ends up being put in the care of Fisherman, who is her mom's landlord. And Fisherman pretty much kind of teaches Reese about the world and about everything, and Reese soon develops a very big crush on Fisherman, and that kind of turns into more spicy time. I loved this. This book is so angsty, and I have never had a book where I needed them to get together. Not kiss already, I needed them to full on have sex, and they just were not doing it, and it was driving me insane. But I love this book, I love their dynamic. Forbidden romance is my thing. I absolutely love age gap romance, so I knew I was gonna love this first book. I will say, a lot of people I've seen on Goodreads are very, very frustrated with the main character in the beginning, and I totally get it, and I also was completely frustrated with her. But you also have to think of how she was raised, that she just doesn't understand some of these things. And overall, I ended up loving the main character. Now, the second book features a trope I absolutely despise. So this is a spoiler. I'm gonna give you 5 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The second book is an amnesia romance. So, I hate amnesia romances. I don't know what it is about them. They are my least favorite romance trope of all time. I hate them. Every single romance besides this one, I have rated like 2 stars. I just don't get the hype. They all remind me of The Notebook without fail. So this does have an amnesia romance. Fisherman does end up forgetting our main character. However, I actually really like this because it kind of shows our main character trying to win back the person that she was originally in love with. And now as an adult, looking back, she realized, hey, we actually are soulmates and we should be together. And it was just, I really, really enjoyed this series. So if you like forbidden romance, you like age gap, definitely check out The Naked Fisherman. And last up, this book caused me the most emotional damage I've ever had from a book. I had a stomach ache while reading. Like, I was so invested and yet torn. This book, it's ridiculous. It's a Heartbreak Warfare, and it's by Kate Stewart. First of all, I'm so mad at myself because I had friends telling me I needed to pick this book up last year, and I kept putting it off because I'm not typically a fan of military romance. However, this book is amazing, and I will never read it again because of the emotional turmoil I felt while reading it. So we are following this girl, Katie, and she is about to re-enlist and be deployed. Now, she is married, happily married. She has a young son, and at the beginning of the book, she is just so devastated that she decided to deploy again. She wants to stay home with her husband and her young son, and she's like, I'm just gonna make the best of it. Her husband is also in the military, so he understands, and he's crying, and he's like, look, I love you, just come back, and then we can figure out if you're gonna re-enlist. So she ends up being deployed. I think she goes to Baghdad. And when she gets there, she meets some other people in the army, and she kind of develops a friendship. Well, then she ends up being taken as a prisoner of war along with another army person. Why can't I think of the name of it? Anyway, his name is Briggs. They are both taken as prisoners of war and are held for, I think, a few weeks, and they go through the most upsetting and just absolute torture. If you've read Still Beating, not quite like that, but similar feels, Still Beating by Jennifer Hartman. And after she comes out of this, she's eventually saved. Her entire life is upside down, and she has now come back from war in love with somebody else who isn't her husband, and she has to choose between them. And it is just so upsetting because both Briggs and Gavin are amazing men that just want the best for her, that just love her, but she can't choose between them. She has this happy family, or she has this guy that she just spent this time with, and they just both shared this trauma together. And it's so heartbreaking, and just, I loved this book, but once again, I will never read it again. But if you want to cry and just be emotionally devastated, definitely check out Heartbreak Warfare. All right, guys, those are all the books I read in June. Please let me know down in the comments below if you have read any of the books I mentioned, and thank you so much for watching. I said this already, I post new videos every Wednesday and Sunday, and if you haven't yet, please like and subscribe. I will see you all next week. Bye.